Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Hillary Rodham Clinton.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. I have been backstage watching the proceedings on a screen back there and just feeling energized by the enthusiasm here tonight on behalf of the Global Fund and its work over more than 25 years. I am so pleased that I can be here joining with all of you to make sure that the work of the fund continues and touches even more lives, transforming them, and through that, transforming societies and countries. I want to thank Abby for her introduction, but more than that, for the film that we saw that she produced, which was so uplifting. And also to my longtime friend and colleague in some of the battles of the past, Dina Dublon, and all the supporters of the Global Fund. I also particularly want to recognize Jennifer Buffett and Jackie Zahner, who are being honored tonight with the Global Philanthropy Award. And I always love listening to Christian, and we are so pleased that your voice and your influence is being heard around the world. The message that you delivered tonight is one I've heard you deliver, seen you deliver, and I thank you for being such a strong voice on behalf of women and girls. And I want to thank Dr. Kanya Rowe, who has taken on the leadership of the fund and championed not only the organization, but the underlying work that means so much to all of us. I've been obsessed the last few days, as I'm sure a number of you have been, about the terrible violence and loss of life and injury in Boston. And like so many Americans and those watching around the world, we saw ordinary citizens alongside first responders rushing into danger to help. It was a tragic, terrible day, but it seemed to exemplify what Patriots' Day really means. Because we do better when we work together. Women and men, all of us across every line that is used to divide us. And it is important that as our hearts go out and our support for the people who were affected in Boston, that we remember what makes this country so unique, this sense of volunteerism, whether it's responding to a disaster like we saw on the streets of Boston the other day, where strangers were helping strangers, or whether it's this global fund that started with 4 women having a conversation. I think it is one of our greatest strengths. And what the Global Fund has done, and what brings me, along with all of you here tonight, is to celebrate and support the partnerships that have been forged with grassroots women's organizations across the globe. 175 countries, urban and rural areas, conflict zones, geographically and politically isolated places where literally the support you are providing tonight can make the difference between life and death, between the potential that every person, woman and man alike, deserves to have fulfilled, and disappointment and dashed dreams. You've already heard that the grants that are going to NGOs and civil society groups are now more than 100 million in total. And I personally appreciate greatly all the work that the Global Fund has done with the Clinton Global Initiative, because part of the strength of the Global Fund is creating such partnerships. You saw brief snippets of the lives that were being affected in Abby's movie, but really stop and think for a moment about the women entrepreneurs that you are supporting. They're starting businesses. They're winning financial independence. Think about the girls going to school for the first time or being the first girl in their family or their village to go beyond primary school. Think about the survivors of domestic violence who are rebuilding their lives with counseling, job training, legal services. Think about the domestic workers who are enjoying new rights and opportunities. Think about the women who are running for local and even national office and winning. You are engaged in what I believe is the great unfinished business of the 21st century, advancing the rights and opportunities of girls and women so that they can be full participants in their communities, their economies, their societies, their nations, and yes, our world. Now, I like the Global Fund because from the very beginning, it has understood that women can be agents of change, drivers of progress, makers of peace. All they need is a fighting chance. That we have to stop seeing women as victims and start seeing them as the people who own their own lives and can help the rest of us understand the future that can be created. You know, as Secretary of State, I saw what I knew in vivid example after example as I traveled around the world. It is no coincidence that so many of the countries that threaten regional and global peace are places where women and girls are denied dignity and opportunity. Think of the young women from northern Mali all the way to Afghanistan whose schools were destroyed. That young, brave Pakistani woman, Malala, who has galvanized the world on behalf of the right of girls to get an education. Think of the girls across Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia who are condemned to child marriage. That picture of that 6-year-old little girl in the refugee camp, the Afghan refugee camp across the border in Pakistan, who was being put forward as collateral for her father's loan. We are following that story, but it was an American woman lawyer who worked to pay the debt, to prevent that little girl from being forced to marry a man in the family of the creditor. Think about the refugees of the conflicts from eastern Congo to Syria, primarily women and their children who endure rape as a weapon of war. No, it is no coincidence where we find conflict, where we find the worst of humanity, we find women and girls who are abused and mistreated, viewed as almost another species, not quite human. But we're also seeing that in countries where the rule of law and democracy are struggling to take root, women and girls are still having problems participating as full and equal citizens. The story is not done in the countries of the Arab awakening, but in Egypt, where women stood on the front lines of the revolution, they are now being denied seats at the table, and they face a rising tide of sexual violence. It's also no coincidence that in countries making the leap from poverty to prosperity, there are lots of questions about whether or not women will be empowered. One of the great unanswered questions for the next decade or two is whether or not countries like China and India can sustain their growth and emerge as true global economic powers. Much of that depends on how they treat their women and girls. So these are not coincidences. Research all over the world shows what we know, that when women participate in their economy, everyone benefits. When they participate in peacemaking and peacekeeping, we are all safer and more stable. And you have to look no further than tonight's recipients of the Charlotte Bunch Human Rights Defender Awards to know this is true. 3 women from very different places who have worked in their own ways toward the same goal, advancing the rights and opportunities for women. Stasha Zayavich helped bring the Women in Black movement to the Balkans in the 1990s. Today, she continues her work for peace and justice. Mohsin Hassan, one of the many brave activists calling for equality and dignity for all Egyptians, women and men, is working to build a genuine democracy, respect for universal human rights, protection of all citizens. And no one knows that struggle better than Monica Roa, who has championed judicial reform in Colombia and pushed the courts to honor and protect women's rights and women's health. These 3 women are exemplars of what can be achieved when courage and compassion meet. And they are part of a powerful new current of grassroots activism. Someone who has been leading the charge and making this case for a long time is Charlotte Bunch. She has always been on the front line of this struggle. As an activist and an organizer, a writer and a teacher, a champion for our common humanity. I got to know her in the run-up to the 4th World Conference on Women in Beijing back in 1995. I saw her as an extraordinary leader and advocate, immersed in the workings of international law and understanding the almost incomprehensible UN process. Because she knew that to weave the rights and concerns of women into the fabric of the international community, the world needed to come together. The historic outcomes of Beijing would not have been possible without her tireless work and her brilliant vision. She didn't stop there, though. She founded the Center for Women's Global Leadership at Rutgers, which provided an intellectual and organizing foundation for work around the world, especially in the fight against sexual and gender-based violence. She also led the gender equality architecture reform effort that laid the groundwork for the creation of UN Women, a major step forward in the international system. She has been a tireless advocate for the UN Convention on the Elimination of All Discrimination Against Women, and let me say again, it is way past time for the United States to demonstrate our global leadership by finally ratifying the convention. A year after Beijing, I was very proud to stand and see my husband honor Charlotte as a leader with the Eleanor Roosevelt Award for Human Rights in 1996. And when I became Secretary of State, she was one of a small group of women leaders I brought together to help steer a new course for American diplomacy and to ensure that the needs and concerns of women and girls were integrated into all aspects of our foreign policy. So I am grateful for Charlotte's leadership. I'm really impressed by all of her contributions, and I'm also challenged by her absolute demand that we keep doing more and more, that no matter what we've done, we can't be satisfied. So I think we should all work to be worthy of Charlotte's example, to keep fighting for rights and opportunities, to keep pushing for participation, to keep telling the world that human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights once and for all. Now join me in learning more about Charlotte Bunch and her extraordinary work.